Hey guys, tonight we are diving headfirst into the mid-14th century, to a world teetering on the edge of a catastrophe it cannot yet comprehend. Imagine, for a moment, the world outside your window is not one of quiet streets and electric lights, but of wood smoke, mud, and the distant, ever-present ringing of church bells. You're lying on a straw mattress, not because it's rustic chic, but because it's the peak of affordable luxury. The air doesn't smell of clean linen or night-blooming jasmine. It's a thick, complex bouquet of damp earth, animal musk, and something vaguely rotten you'd rather not identify. Frankly, you probably won't survive this experience even before the plague arrives, just based on the general lack of modern sanitation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know down in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where these stories land. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you're aware of is not a sound, but a feeling. A deep, damp cold that has seeped through your thin woolen blanket and settled into your bones. There's no central heating here, no insulated walls to keep the pre-dawn chill at bay. There is only the fleeting warmth of other bodies huddled close. You crack open an eyelid, and the world resolves itself in shades of gray and brown. You're in a room, a single room, that serves as the kitchen, living room, and bedroom for your entire family. Your mother and father are a pair of snoring mounds beside you on the communal straw-stuffed mattress that rests on a simple wooden frame. Your two younger siblings are curled up at the foot of the bed, a tangle of limbs and grubby faces. It's a full house, and forget personal space. The only thing you're cuddling with tonight is your dad's feet and possibly a goat. Yes, in the far corner, near the dying embers of the hearth, you can just make out the shape of the family's prize goat, contentedly chewing its cud. Bringing livestock inside wasn't just for fairy tales, it was a practical way to prevent them from being stolen and to benefit from their body heat. A low, persistent ache in your back reminds you that your mattress hasn't seen a refresh in years. It's not just straw in there anymore. It's a compressed geology of sweat, shed skin, and a thriving ecosystem of fleas and lice that you've long since accepted as cohabitants. You sit up, the scratchy wool blanket pooling in your lap. The air is thick with the smell of stale ale, unwashed bodies, and wood smoke. There's no chimney in your Waddle Daub home, just a hole in the thatched roof that allows most, but certainly not all, of the smoke from the central fire pit to escape. This constant exposure to smoke is a mainstream historical fact of daily life, leading to chronic respiratory problems that would leave your modern lungs screaming in protest. Your eyes burn, and you reflexively cough, a dry, hacking sound that thankfully doesn't wake anyone else. Your gaze drifts to the floor. It isn't wood or stone, but packed earth covered with a layer of rushes. This brings us to a rather quirky, and frankly disgusting, tidbit about medieval hygiene. While scattering fresh reeds might seem like a quaint, rustic air freshener, the reality was far grimier. The scholar Erasmus, writing a bit later than our time period, but about the same enduring custom, noted that these rushes were rarely changed. The top layer might get a refresh, but underneath lay a compressed mess of spittle, vomit, the urine of dogs and men, ale droppings, scraps of fish, and other abominations not fit to be mentioned. Your home is, quite literally, carpeted in old garbage. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, your bare feet landing on the slightly greasy texture of the topmost layer of reeds. Your first task of the morning awaits. Under the bed is the chamber pot, a simple ceramic vessel containing the collected waste of the family from the night before. This is your ensuite bathroom, 14th century style. You carefully lift the heavy pot, sloshing its contents precariously. Your destination is the front door, or perhaps the single, unglazed window. You shuffle across the room, past the simmering cauldron that hangs over the hearth. This is the pottage pot, the heart of the home's cuisine. It was rarely ever fully emptied. Yesterday's leftover vegetable stew, the perpetual pottage, would simply be topped up with whatever was available today, some onions, a bit of barley, maybe a handful of beans. This ever-simmering stew formed the basis of your diet. Historians still argue whether the average medieval peasant was chronically undernourished, or if their diet, while monotonous, was surprisingly sufficient in calories for a life of hard labor. Looking at the thin, watery gruel bubbling away, you're not feeling particularly robust. You reach the window, a simple opening in the wall with a wooden shutter you now push aside. The street below is barely a street at all. It's more of a narrow, muddy lane. The upper floors of the houses, and a design feature known as a jetty, loom over the ground floor, nearly touching the house opposite. This architectural choice casts the street in a permanent, gloomy twilight and, more importantly, makes it the perfect funnel. You take a deep breath, a mistake you immediately regret, and heave the contents of the chamber pot into the lane below. You don't shout a warning. Nobody does. It's just part of the morning routine, the garde-à-l'eau of medieval sanitation. The slop joins the river of other household waste, animal droppings, and rainwater that flows sluggishly down the central gutter, a channel they charitably call a kennel. And now, your first chore complete, you must prepare to step out into that very street. Your day has just begun, and already you are surrounded on all sides by the perfect conditions for a public health disaster. You just don't know it yet. You pull your head back inside, the stench from the street momentarily replaced by the familiar, smoky air of your one-room home. The thought of stepping out into that muck on an empty stomach is deeply unappealing. Survival, even on a normal day, is about small, strategic decisions, and the first one is always food. Your mother is awake now, her movements slow and practiced in the glow. She's tending to the perpetual pottage pot we talked about, giving it a stir with a long wooden spoon before ladling a meager amount of the thin, grayish liquid into a couple of rough-hewn wooden bowls. She hands one to you without a word. There are no good mornings or cheerful breakfast conversations. Life is too full of toil for such pleasantries. The warmth of the bowl seeps into your cold hands, a small comfort in a world that offers few. You take a sip. It tastes of boiled cabbage, onions, and the faint, earthy bitterness of turnip. It's not delicious. It's not meant to be. It's fuel, plain and simple, and its main job is to be wet and warm. The main event of your breakfast sits on the small, rickety table, a large, dark loaf of bread, and a clay jug of ale. Your father takes his knife, a tool used for everything from mending leather to cutting his food, and saws off a thick hunk of bread for you. This isn't the light, airy bread of your modern imagination. This is bread of substance, bread that could double as a defensive weapon. It's a maslin loaf, made from a mix of wheat and rye, the coarse grains leaving it dense, dark, and heavy. It's several days old, possessing a texture somewhere between tough and fossilized. You know, from grim experience, that trying to bite into it directly is a recipe for a lost tooth. The only way to make it edible is to tear off a piece and submerge it in your pottage, letting the thin broth soak into the coarse crumb until it's soft enough to chew. As you gum the softened bread, you ponder its contents. This brings us to a rather unsettling, quirky tidbit about your daily bread. It might be lying about its own ingredients. Bakers in medieval towns had a notorious reputation for adulterating their flour to cut costs and increase the weight of their loaves. It wasn't uncommon for them to mix in cheaper materials like dried beans, chalk, sawdust, or even dirt. As you bite down, you feel a distinct and unwelcome crunch. Is it just a bit of grit from the millstone? Or has your baker been getting creative with the local sandbox again? A little extra fiber, I suppose. To wash this down, you're not reaching for milk or, heaven forbid, water. You pour yourself a cup of ale from the jug. It's 7 a.m., and you're already hitting the booze. Don't worry, so is everyone else in the city, including your younger siblings who are now awake and chewing on their own crusts. It's for your health, you see. This is a crucial, mainstream historical fact of the era. Drinking water was a risky proposition. With human and animal waste flowing freely in the streets, rivers and wells were often contaminated with diseases like dysentery and typhoid. The process of brewing, however, involved boiling the water, killing most of the harmful bacteria. The resulting drink was small beer, a weak ale with a very low alcohol content, often less than 1%. It was hydrating, relatively safe, and provided a surprising amount of calories to the peasant diet. It has a slightly sour, slightly sweet taste, and you drink it down gratefully. Your balanced breakfast for the day now consists of carbs, slightly alcoholic carbs, and boiled-to-death vegetable carbs. There is no fruit, no protein to speak of, and certainly no source of vitamin C. You are setting out for a day of hard labor with a nutritional baseline that is, to be blunt, abysmal. Historians still argue whether the concept of freshness, as we understand it, even existed for the common person, or if a state of perpetual staleness was simply the accepted norm for most foodstuffs. For you, this loaf of bread isn't stale, it's just bread. Freshness is a luxury reserved for the lord of the manor, who might have white bread baked daily. Your bread is baked perhaps once a week, and your main concern isn't its taste, but whether it has gone moldy. You inspect your hunk for any telltale blue or green fuzz. This one seems clear for now. You finish your meal in silence, the scraping of spoons against wood the only sound. Your body has calories in it, a temporary reprieve from the gnawing hunger that is a constant, low hum in the background of your life. But your immune system? It's been given a pittance. It's a castle guard armed with a wooden stick, standing watch against an invading army it doesn't even know is coming. This meal hasn't fortified your defenses, it has merely delayed their collapse. And with the last of the bread swallowed and the last of the ale drunk, the moment can no longer be avoided. Your father grunts, rises, and heads for the door. It's time for work. It's time to face the world you glimpse through the window. You take a final look around the dim, smoky room that is your entire world, your sanctuary of squalor. As bad as it is in here, it is at least familiar. What lies outside is a different challenge entirely. You stand, pull your rough-spun tunic tight, and follow your father, the damp chill of the morning air hitting you as you cross the threshold. You step out of the doorway and into the lane, and the world attacks your senses. The air, which you thought was bad inside, is 100 times worse out here. It's a physical presence, a humid, tangible miasma that coats the back of your throat. It's the combined perfume of the entire neighborhood, the sour stench of the local tanner curing leather with foul concoctions, the smoke from 100 small fires, the rot of discarded vegetable matter, and, underpinning it all, the raw, inescapable odor of human and animal waste. You recall the chamber pot you emptied just an hour ago, and you realize you're now standing in the final destination of your own contribution, along with those of every other family on this lane. Your daily commute is less of a walk and more of a real-life game of Frogger, except instead of cars, you're dodging flying buckets of filth and the occasional aggressive goose. The ground beneath your feet is not paved. It is a treacherous landscape of thick, sucking mud and filth, churned into a slurry by the passage of feet, cartwheels, and hoofs. You see wealthier merchants striding with purposeful confidence, their fine leather shoes protected by patents. This quirky but essential tidbit of medieval technology was a kind of overshoe, a wooden clog on a raised iron or wooden platform, designed specifically to lift the wearer a few precious inches above the muck. You, of course, have no such luxury. Your shoes are simple leather turnshoes, and they are already soaked, the cold, foul-smelling liquid seeping through the seams. You pick your way forward, your eyes scanning the ground for the deepest pools and most hazardous-looking lumps. The lane is crowded. You're pressed shoulder to shoulder with 100 of your closest, unwashed neighbors. Social distancing hasn't been invented yet. In fact, you're pretty sure the prevailing philosophy is social condensing. People shout, haggle, and shove. A group of children, faces smeared with dirt, chase a stray dog. You also have to contend with the city's other residents' animals. A sow and her piglets trot past, snuffling happily in a pile of refuse. These pigs aren't pets, they're the city's unofficial, four-legged sanitation department, gobbling up the organic waste that would otherwise pile even higher. And, of course, they are also future bacon. It's the circle of life, medieval edition. Suddenly, you hear the creak of a wooden shutter opening from a third-story window above you. Your head snaps up. Years of living here have honed your reflexes. You flatten yourself against the wall just as a cascade of liquid arches through the air and splatters onto the exact spot where you were a second ago. You don't even flinch. It's just another near miss. This is the reality behind the famous cry of Gardaloo. Historians still argue whether that specific phrase, a supposed corruption of the French garde as l'eau, or watch out for the water, was a widespread, genuine custom or a later, romanticized invention to dramatize medieval squalor. For you, it doesn't matter what they shout, or if they shout at all. The danger is real, a constant, random threat from above. You just wipe a stray splash from your cheek and keep moving. As you turn onto a slightly wider, more traveled thoroughfare, the noise intensifies. Street vendors, known as costermongers, are crying their wares. Pies. Hot pies, one shouts, waving a tray of small, greasy-looking pastries. Fresh fish, cries another, though the smell from his cart suggests fresh is a very optimistic term. Your stomach, despite the questionable breakfast you had, gives a low grumble. But you have no coin for such treats. Your labor is not your own to sell. It belongs to your father and his trade. This brings us to the mainstream historical fact that governs your entire existence, the guild system. Your father is a master weaver, a member of the powerful Drapers Guild that controls the production and sale of cloth in the city. You are his apprentice. It's not a choice, it's your inheritance. You will spend years learning the craft, performing the most menial tasks, in the hopes of one day becoming a journeyman, and eventually, a master yourself. The guild provides structure, security, and identity. It also enforces a rigid hierarchy that you are at the bottom of. Finally, you arrive at your destination. It's not a grand storefront, but another timber frame building, slightly larger than your home, with the workshop on the ground floor. The familiar clack 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 of a large loom echoes from within, a rhythmic counterpoint to the chaotic noise of the street. The air here has its own unique scent, the oily smell of raw wool, the sharp tang of the dyes, and the sweat of hard labor. You have survived the morning commute, a journey that has already exposed you to more filth and potential pathogens than a modern person might encounter in a lifetime. You have successfully navigated a world actively trying to soil you, trip you, and douse you in waste. You take a breath, preparing yourself for 10 hours of repetitive, back-breaking work in a dusty, poorly lit room. The day is young, and your fragile medieval health has already cleared several hurdles. But the real marathon has just begun. You've been at the loom for hours, and the rhythmic work is both mind-numbing and physically taxing. The air in the workshop is thick with tiny, floating fibers of wool, a constant irritant that catches in your throat. That small, smoky cough you woke up with in your hovel has now deepened into a persistent hack that rattles your chest with each breath. Every time you erupt into a coughing fit, your father shoots you a glare. It's not a look of concern, it's one of pure annoyance. A sick apprentice is an unproductive apprentice. Finally, after you spoil a thread for the third time, he's had enough. He shoves a small coin into your hand and tells you to go see the barber surgeon down the street and get yourself sorted. He doesn't want you back until the noise stops. So, you step back out into the street, now on a new mission. To receive the best health care the 14th century can offer a person of your standing. You find the shop easily, marked by the iconic red and white striped pole, a symbol that advertises the man's twin trades of cutting hair and letting blood. You step inside a room that smells sharply of strange herbs and faintly, coppery and sweet, of old blood. Jars containing dark, squirming leeches line one shelf. On another, terrifyingly sharp-looking metal tools are laid out next to mortars and pestles. The barber surgeon, a stout man with stained hands and a serious expression, listens to your complaint, nodding sagely. He doesn't pull out a stethoscope or a thermometer. Instead, he launches into an explanation that is the absolute, mainstream historical foundation of all medieval medicine, the theory of the four humors. He explains that your body, like everything in the universe, is governed by four vital fluids: blood, which is hot and moist; phlegm, which is cold and moist; yellow bile, which is hot and dry; and black bile, which is cold and dry. A healthy person has these four humors in perfect balance. Your cough, he declares with great authority, is clearly the result of an imbalance. Your body is producing an excess of phlegm, making you too cold and too moist. This is what's causing the irritation in your chest. The logic seems impeccable, mostly because it's the only logic available. To confirm his diagnosis, he requires a sample. He hands you a glass flask and points to a small curtained-off corner. You return a few moments later with a specimen of your urine. This brings us to a quirky and central tidbit of medieval diagnostics: uroscopy. The barber surgeon doesn't run a lab test. He simply holds the flask up to the light, peering at it with the intense focus of a wine connoisseur. You're half expecting him to comment on its fruity notes and robust finish. He notes its color, its cloudiness, and its sediment, comparing it to a detailed circular chart hanging on the wall, a uroscopy wheel that links every possible shade and consistency of urine to a specific ailment. After a moment of grave contemplation, he announces that your urine is indeed too pale and thin. The diagnosis is confirmed, an overabundance of phlegm. Now for the treatment. To counteract a humor that is cold and moist, you must introduce things that are hot and dry. His first prescription is dietary. You are to avoid cold foods like fish, cucumbers, and watery fruits. Instead, you should eat hot foods like roasted chicken, garlic, peppers, and drink strong red wine. This is fantastic advice, except your daily diet consists of stale bread and boiled cabbage. It's like a doctor today telling a minimum wage worker to de-stress by buying a private yacht. You're not alone, knowing you can't afford any of it. But this is just the preliminary step. The main treatment, the cure-all for nearly every ailment, is bloodletting. So, the cure for your minor cough is getting stabbed on purpose and having your vital fluids drained into a bowl. It's the medicinal equivalent of hitting your old television to fix the static. What could possibly go wrong? Before you can object, he has you sit, rolls up your sleeve, and produces a small, wicked-looking knife called a fleam. He taps your arm to find a good vein. Then with a quick, practiced motion, he makes a small incision. The blood, dark and shockingly red, begins to well up and trickle down your arm into a brass bowl he holds underneath. You watch, mesmerized and horrified, as the bowl slowly fills. The barber watches the blood's color and consistency, nodding to himself as if it's telling him a story. You start to feel lightheaded, the room tilting slightly. When he decides enough has been taken, about a pint's worth, he binds your arm with a strip of linen and declares the procedure a success. You've now paid to be made demonstrably weaker. Historians still argue whether the widespread practice of bloodletting was a net positive, occasionally relieving symptoms like high blood pressure by pure chance, or if it was an unmitigated medical disaster that needlessly weakened countless patients on the brink of real illness. As you stand up on wobbly legs, you feel dizzy, your cough is still there, and you're out a coin. The barber surgeon pats you on the back and tells you to come back in a week if you're not feeling better. You stumble back towards the workshop, your body now not only poorly nourished and exhausted, but also significantly down on its own vital fluid. You have just experienced the peak of 14th century medical science. And it is this very system, this philosophy of humors and bleeding, that will soon face the greatest microbial challenge in human history. Your immune system never stood a chance. A few weeks have passed since your encounter with the barber surgeon. The cut on your arm has healed into a small, pale scar, a permanent souvenir of your brush with 14th century healthcare. Your cough eventually subsided, though you can't shake a persistent feeling of weariness, a lingering echo of the blood you lost. You're back at the loom, the clatter of the shuttle, once again the soundtrack to your days. Today, however, brings a welcome break from the monotony. A new shipment of Flemish wool has arrived at the port, and your father has tasked you with hauling a bale back to the workshop. It's heavy work, but it's a change of scenery. You make your way through the familiar squalor of the streets, heading towards the docks, the one place in the city that truly breathes with the rhythm of the wider world. The port is a chaotic symphony of sight, sound, and smell. The air is thick with the tang of salt, tar, and rotting fish, a welcome change from the inland stench of manure and waste. Hulking merchant cogs and slender Genoese galleys are moored at the wharves, their masts of forest against the gray sky. Men from a dozen lands shout in languages you don't understand, hauling crates, barrels, and bales. This is the city's artery, the place where the world's goods and its stories flow in and out. The news cycled back, then ran on a we'll get it when we get it basis. There's no breaking news, just a guy who smells of brine telling you a third-hand story about something that happened 6 months ago, 1,000 miles away. While you wait for the warehouse master to record your father's purchase, you lean against a stack of wine barrels, observing the sailors. A small crowd has gathered around a Genoese crossbowman, his face tanned to leather by a foreign sun. He speaks with dramatic gestures, and though his accent is thick, his story is captivating. He speaks of a trading post called Kaffa, on the shore of the Black Sea. He describes a siege, where the city was surrounded by a great army of Tartars, the warriors of the Golden Horde. But this wasn't a normal siege. The Tartar army, he says, was struck by a terrible sickness, a pestilence that killed them in such numbers their leaders gave up the fight. But before they left, they did something monstrous. This is the mainstream, almost legendary, tale of how the plague first breached the walls of Europe. The sailor claims the Tartars used their giant catapults not to hurl stones, but to launch the swollen, blackened corpses of their own dead soldiers over the walls and into the city. The men listening with you gasp. You try to picture it, a body arcing through the sky, a grotesque missile of disease. The sailor says the sickness spread through Kaffa like a fire in a dry field. The Genoese merchants, including his own captain, fled the dying city in their galleys, desperate to get home. He lowers his voice, speaking of how the sickness seemed to follow them onto the ship, men dying even on the open sea. It's a terrifying story, but it's also unbelievable. It's mixed with other, wilder claims. He talks of the pestilence in the east being accompanied by rains of fire and swarms of serpents. It sounds less like a report and more like a scene from the book of Revelation. These kinds of fantastical stories were common. For centuries, people in your part of the world have whispered of Prester John, a mythical Christian king ruling a kingdom of wonders in the Orient. This quirky, fringe belief colored every piece of news from the East. A story about a plague could easily get tangled up with a story about Prester John's kingdom being besieged by monstrous, ungodly forces. So as you listen, you're not sure if you're getting a public health warning or a pitch for a new fantasy romance. You're leaning towards the romance. You hear this tale of biblical-level devastation far away, and you just shrug. Your name is finally called by the warehouse master. You heave the heavy, oily-smelling bale of wool onto your shoulders, your back protesting. The story is already fading from your mind, filed away under sailors' tall tales. Historians still argue whether the siege of Kaffa was truly the primary entry point of the plague into Europe, or just one of many ports through which the already spreading disease gained a foothold on the continent. For you, the debate is meaningless. The story is an abstraction, a horror movie from another land. Your more immediate concerns are the strain in your lower back from the wool, the lingering dizziness from your bloodletting session last month, and the very real possibility of being mugged for your valuable cargo on the way back to the workshop. A global pandemic? A great pestilence? That's a problem for someone else, somewhere else. The whispers from the Silk Road are just that, whispers. They are too distant to feel real, too faint to be a threat. You adjust the bale on your shoulders and begin the slow trudge home, utterly oblivious to the fact that the very ships in this harbor, perhaps even the one that brought this sailor, are carrying not just wool and wine, but a silent, invisible passenger that will soon make the sailor's story feel like a gentle understatement. The seasons have turned. The brief, muddy warmth of summer has bled into the damp chill of autumn. The sailor's story you heard down at the docks has long since faded from your memory, buried under the weight of countless days spent at the loom, your world shrinking back to the familiar rhythm of work, eat, and sleep. The wool you carried back that day has been woven into cloth, sold at market, and is probably keeping some wealthy merchant warm right now. Life, in its grimy, repetitive way, has been utterly normal. And then, one day, it isn't. It begins as a murmur, another piece of neighborhood gossip. You hear that Thomas, the burly blacksmith whose hammer falls are a constant morning sound, has taken to his bed. He has a fever and a headache. You think nothing of it. It's the 14th century equivalent of the seasonal flu. Everyone gets fevers and aches. You assume he'll just sweat it out. Maybe his wife will make him a foul-tasting herbal brew, and he'll be back at his forge in a week, complaining loudly. That's the standard procedure for feeling under the weather. But Thomas doesn't get better. The whispers about him grow more urgent, more frightened. His wife is heard weeping. He's said to be shivering uncontrollably, yet burning with a fever so hot you can feel it from a pace away. He's delirious, shouting at shadows on the wall. Then comes the new word. A word you've never heard before, spoken in hushed, terrified tones by the women at the public well. Bubo. They say a lump has appeared on Thomas's neck, a hard, painful swelling under the skin. The next day, you see the barber surgeon leaving the blacksmith's home, his face pale and his usual air of professional confidence completely gone. He clutches his bag of tools and flees, but he looks like a man who has just seen a ghost. His big idea was, you guessed it, more bloodletting, which is all the effectiveness of trying to put out a house fire with a water pistol. His medical chart for giant black egg growing out of your neck appears to be blank. This swelling is the first clinical sign, the mainstream historical fact that heralds the arrival of the great pestilence. It's a swollen lymph node, a bubo, which gives the bubonic plague its name. It appears in the groin, the armpit, or the neck, the places where the body's drainage systems converge. Within a day, the lump on Thomas's neck has reportedly grown to the size of a small apple. The skin over it is stretched taut and has taken on a dark, purplish-black hue. This is the token, the undeniable sign of this new, horrifying sickness. Thomas the blacksmith is dead in 4 days. A week later, his wife and 2 children are also gone. The rhythmic sound of the hammer is replaced by a profound and unsettling silence. You walk past the blacksmith's house on your way to the workshop. The door is shut tight, the windows shuttered. No smoke rises from the roof. You instinctively pull your thin woolen tunic a little tighter, as if it were a biohazard suit. Spoiler alert, it is not. The fear is a cold knot in your stomach. This was not a normal illness. This was a predator. Soon, another case appears. A woman who sells eels by the city gate. The same story unfolds with terrifying speed. The fever, the delirium, and then the telltale bubo in her armpit. People start to remember the sailor's stories, the whispers of a pestilence from the east. The fantasy story has become a local news bulletin. And here is a quirky, unsettling tidbit you might notice if you were paying close attention. The rats. There seem to be fewer of them lately. You see one stumbling in the gutter in broad daylight, slow and disoriented, before it collapses. You think nothing of it. Good riddance. Unaware that the rats are the first victims, their fleas now seeking new, warm-blooded hosts. The sickness is so strange, so aggressive, that it defies all known medical logic. Historians still argue whether the Black Death was solely the bubonic plague we know today, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, or if it was a combination of diseases, or perhaps a different, now extinct virus, given its reported hyperlethality and incredibly rapid person-to-person spread. To you, the academic debate is irrelevant. All you know is that it's a monster no one has ever seen. It doesn't follow the rules of the four humors. It kills the strong as easily as the weak, the young as swiftly as the old. That night, you lie on your straw mattress in the suffocating darkness of your hovel. The usual night sounds, a distant dog, the scuttling in the walls, are now charged with menace. Every cough from a neighbor, every moan, sends a jolt of panic through you. And then you hear it. A cough from the other side of the thin wattle and daub wall that separates your home from your neighbors. It's not a wet, productive cough like the one you had. It's a dry, hacking, desperate sound. You lie there, eyes wide open in the dark, listening. Your heart hammers against your ribs. The abstract horror from the docks is no longer a story. It's not in a far-off land. It's not even across the city. It's on the other side of your wall. The plague has arrived. You wake the next morning to a world that feels fundamentally different. The fear from the night before, listening to your neighbor's dry, hacking coughs, has not subsided with the dawn. It has solidified into a grim certainty. The monster is no longer at the city gates, it is inside the house next door. As you and your family huddle together, chewing your coarse bread in silence, the unspoken question hangs in the smoky air. Why is this happening? And more importantly, what can be done? The barber surgeon and his humors have proven useless. His theories are like trying to explain a thunderstorm by talking about a grumpy giant. You need a bigger explanation, a framework for this new and terrifying reality. And in the 14th century, there are only two available. Your mother, her face etched with a fear that seems deeper than your own, insists you all go to the church. The priest stands before the small congregation, his voice thundering with a mixture of terror and righteous fury. He offers the first and most powerful explanation. This is the wrath of God. The pestilence is a divine scourge, a punishment for the sins of a corrupt and decadent world. He lists the sins, and the list is long. There's the greed of merchants, the vanity of women, the heresy of strange new cults, and even the absurdly long, pointed shoes, called krakows, that wealthy young men have taken to wearing. You look down at your own simple, mud-caked leather turn shoes and feel a small, irrational flicker of relief. At least your footwear isn't going to send you to an early grave. The priest's solution is simple and absolute: repentance. You must pray, you must fast, you must confess your sins and beg for God's mercy. Only a return to piety can save you now. You leave the church, your ears ringing with apocalyptic warnings, and step back into the street. Here, you see the second great theory being put into practice. This is the scientific explanation, the one favored by the physicians and learned men. They call it miasma. This mainstream historical theory held that disease was spread by bad air, a poisonous vapor that rose from putrid, decaying matter. And frankly, looking around your city, this theory makes a lot of sense. The miasma is believed to emanate from swamps, stagnant water, slaughterhouses, and, of course, the mountains of filth and human waste that choke every lane, including your own. The solution, therefore, is not prayer, but air purification. You see it everywhere. People are burning huge bonfires in the middle of squares, using aromatic woods like juniper and ash, the thick smoke intended to cleanse the air. Wealthier citizens walk about clutching pomanders, ornate metal balls filled with fragrant ambergris, musk, or cloves, which they hold to their noses constantly. Your new personal hygiene routine might involve just carrying a bunch of herbs or a vinegar-soaked rag to sniff. You'd look ridiculous, but you'd smell slightly better than everyone else, which in a medieval city is practically a superpower. It's the 14th century version of slathering yourself in hand sanitizer. And then there's the noise. This is a truly quirky tidbit born of miasma theory. Some believe that the corrupt air was so fragile that it could be shattered by loud sounds. And so, the city has become a deafening bedlam. Church bells are ringing at all hours, not for services, but in a frantic, ceaseless clang, clang, clang meant to break up the invisible poison. Some wealthy guilds are even firing small cannons and culverins into the air. The world is not just terrified, it's unbearably loud. So which path do you choose? The priest tells you to gather in prayerful procession, while the physician tells you to avoid crowds at all costs. The priest says the disease is an act of God's will, while the miasma theory suggests it's a natural phenomenon you can fight with practical measures. So, to survive, you must simultaneously attend Mass to save your soul, and flee the city to find clean air, and walk around ringing a bell like a town crier with a head injury. The advice is as clear as the puddle of muck you're currently standing in. This schism created a deep spiritual crisis. Historians still argue whether the intense religious responses to the plague led to a genuine, long-lasting spiritual revival or if they primarily sowed the seeds of anticlericalism and skepticism. As people watched the pious and the priests die just as readily, often more readily, than everyone else, that evening, the argument plays out in your own hovel. Your mother is on her knees, praying with a fervor you've never seen. She wants the family to join a penitential procession planned for the next day. Your father, however, is practical. He points towards the street and mutters about the stench, saying it's the air that's the killer. He talks about his cousins who live in a small village in the countryside, where the air is clean. We should leave, he says, his voice low. We should run. You are caught in the middle. Your eternal soul on one side, your physical body on the other. Every choice you make from this moment on, from whether you step outside your door to how you spend your last coin, will be dictated by your belief in one of these two fatally flawed theories. You have to choose, are you fighting God's anger, or a poisonous fog? Your life depends on the answer, and you have absolutely no way of knowing which is correct. The argument in your hovel, to pray or to flee, is abruptly rendered moot by a new sound from the street. The sharp, clear ring of the town crier's bell. A proclamation. In a desperate attempt to impose order on the growing chaos, the city aldermen have done something unprecedented. They have used civic funds to hire a specialist, a physician who deals only with the pestilence. He is not the familiar barber surgeon, nor a university-trained doctor who would refuse to enter a poor neighborhood like yours. He is something new, a municipal plague doctor, a medico della peste. A wave of desperate, fragile hope ripples through the lane. Finally, an expert. Someone who knows what to do. This new plague specialist arrives in town with all the confidence of a seasoned expert, which is deeply suspicious because the disease has only existed here for a few weeks. His resume basically reads, "Willing to poke sick people with a stick for money. References available upon request, from people who are now dead." He looks the part, at least. He doesn't wear the fine robes of a physician, but is instead cloaked from head to toe in dark, waxed leather, the surface slick and non-porous. He wears thick gloves and a wide-brimmed hat, and most unnervingly, he carries a long wooden cane, which he uses to poke and prod his patients, directing them and lifting their bedclothes without making physical contact. Now, when you picture a plague doctor, you're probably thinking of that terrifying bird mask, right? The long, sinister beak, the crystal eyepieces, the ultimate goth icon. Well, here's a quirky historical plot twist. That famous costume is from the future. The beaked mask was a 17th century invention, most likely created by a physician named Charles Delorme. The plague doctor stalking your streets in the 14th century is a more primitive, but no less frightening, figure. His face is likely covered with a simple cloth mask, perhaps soaked in vinegar, and his whole silhouette is more butcher's apprentice who got lost than creepy raven of death. Still terrifying, just in a less theatrically stylish way. The doctor's methods are based on the same theories as everyone else, miasma and humors, but amplified to a terrifying degree. His first patient on your lane is your neighbor, the one whose coughing kept you awake. The man's wife, frantic with a mix of hope and terror, has used her last coins to hire his services. You watch from your window as the cloaked figure disappears into their hovel. You don't see what happens next, but you hear it. A low murmur of conversation, followed by a single, high-pitched scream of agony that is abruptly cut off. Later, the story spreads. The doctor's grand medical solution for the bubo, the swollen, painful lump that is the disease's token, is to lance it. He takes a scalpel and slices the bubo open to allow that pestilential poison within to drain out. His logic is that the body has concentrated the venom in one place, and it must be released. The releasing the poison part is technically true, I suppose, just not in a way that helps the patient. The procedure is excruciating, introduces new avenues for infection, and sends the body into a state of shock, very often hastening death. Your neighbor is dead by nightfall. This is the mainstream historical fact about these contracted plague doctors. Their primary, and most feared, intervention was this brutal, hands-on surgery. But their arsenal of horrors didn't stop there. They would plaster the open wounds with bizarre poultices. Some were relatively benign, a paste of figs and butter. Others were stomach-turning concoctions of ground-up, dried toads or pigeon entrails, which were believed to have special properties that could draw out the venom from the body. Their entire practice was a frantic, desperate assault on the patient's body, a war fought with poison against poison. Historians still argue whether these plague doctors, despite their horrific methods, provided any benefit at all, perhaps by offering rudimentary quarantine advice and a measure of psychological comfort. or if their interventions actively and consistently hasten the deaths of their patients. Seeing the grim, silent procession as your neighbor's body, wrapped in a simple shroud, is carried out of his home, you're leaning heavily towards the latter. The doctor provided no cure, only a swifter, more painful end. The arrival of this so-called expert has changed nothing except the nature of the fear. The hope he brought lasted less than a day. Now, you understand that the official response to the crisis, the best solution the city's leaders can offer, is a man whose cures are a form of ritualized torture. The choice is no longer simply between God and miasma, prayer and flight. A third path has been offered, the path of official, civic-sponsored medicine, and it appears to be the most terrifying one of all. You look at his cloaked figure moving down the lane toward his next victim, and you know with chilling certainty that you must never, ever let that man into your home. The plague doctor's visit was the final sigh. The sight of your neighbor's body being hauled away, a victim of both the pestilence and its supposed cure, broke something in your father. That night, the debate was over. Your mother's prayers fell silent, replaced by a grim resolve. Her faith in God remained, but her faith in staying put had evaporated. Myrrh and bonfires were useless. The priest processions were gatherings of the doomed, and the official doctor was a butcher. Your father's first instinct, the instinct to run, was the only one left. You would flee to his cousin's village, a tiny hamlet miles away, nestled in the clean air of the countryside. You are leaving at dawn. You spend the last few hours in your hovel packing for the apocalypse. Your checklist is short and bleak, the last of the hard, stale bread, a skin filled with probably unsafe water from the local well, the threadbare woolen blanket from your bed, and the rough-spun clothes on your back. It's the ultimate minimalist lifestyle, forced upon you by a global pandemic. Every object is weighed, not just in your hands, but against the energy it will cost to carry it. You take one last look at the single, smoky room that has been your entire world. It's a wretched place, but it's the only home you have ever known. There are no tearful goodbyes. You slip out the door before the sun has even risen, melting into the gray, pre-dawn glow. The streets are not empty. A silent, shuffling river of people is flowing in the same direction, towards the city gates. You are not having a unique idea. Thousands of others have come to the same conclusion. This mass exodus is a mainstream feature of every plague account, and it is the very mechanism that will turn a series of urban outbreaks into an unstoppable, continent-wide firestorm. You join the grim procession, a family of anonymous ghosts and a crowd of the terrified. No one speaks. You pass another family, and everyone eyes each other with a deep, animal suspicion. The vibe is less fellow travelers on a grand adventure, and more competitors in the misery Olympics. A friendly hello would be met with a fearful glare. Every person is a potential carrier of the unseen poison you are all trying to escape. Once outside the city walls, the road is no easier. It is a long, muddy track, and the sheer number of people has turned it into a slow-moving quagmire of desperation. The journey is agonizing. Your ill-fitting leather shoes rub your feet raw. The heavy, damp air promises rain. Hunger is a constant, gnawing ache in your belly. But the greatest danger is not the journey itself, but the destination. As the plague spread, a quirky and desperate form of public health policy began to emerge, impromptu travel restrictions. Frightened villages and towns started posting their own guards to block the roads, determined to keep the pestilence, and the refugees carrying it, out. After a day of walking, you see one such blockade. A group of grim-faced men from a small town stand guard with pitchforks and cudgels, barring the road. You can see the smoke from their chimneys, smell the promise of safety, but they wave you away, shouting threats. You are the miasma now. You are the bad air they are trying to purify. The welcome wagon seems to have taken an unscheduled day off. There is no arguing. Your father wordlessly leads you off the road, into the tangled, thorny woods for a long, difficult detour. Historians still argue whether the countryside and rural villages were truly a safer haven, or if their lower population densities were offset by poor nutrition and an almost complete lack of medical resources, making the plague just as lethal, if not more so, once it inevitably arrived. You, stumbling through the undergrowth, tripping on roots, are betting everything on the safer haven theory. After 2 more days of grueling travel, sleeping in the cold woods, you finally arrive. The village is small, a cluster of thatched cottages nestled in a green valley. The air is sweet with the smell of hay and damp earth. It feels like another world, a paradise of tranquility. You find your father's cousin, a stooped farmer who greets you with a mixture of pity and fear. But he takes you in. You are given a place by his fire and a bowl of thick, hearty stew with actual pieces of meat in it. The warmth and the food are so overwhelming you could almost weep. You made it. You survived. You look at your family, their faces gaunt and smeared with dirt, but finally safe. The terror of the city feels a lifetime away. You sit by the fire, a profound exhaustion settling deep into your bones. For the first time in weeks, the knot of fear in your stomach begins to loosen. And in that quiet moment of relief, your youngest sister, who has been strangely silent for the last day of the journey, lets out a cough. It's not a big cough. It's a small, dry, hacking sound. But it's a sound you have heard before. It's the sound you heard through the wall of your hovel, the night before the blacksmith's family began to die. A cold dread, far worse than any you felt in the city, seeps into the room. Your father's face goes ashen. You didn't outrun the plague. You just changed its address. And in your desperate flight to safety, you have become the very thing you feared, the harbinger of death. The cough hangs in the air, small and insignificant, yet powerful enough to shatter the fragile peace of the cottage. The warmth of the fire suddenly feels like a cruel joke. The savory taste of the stew turns to ash in your mouth. You look at your father and see his face, which had just begun to lose its hunted look, collapse back into a mask of pure terror. Your cousin, the farmer, doesn't say a word. He just slowly, deliberately, stands up and takes a step back. Then another. His wife follows, gathering their own children and pulling them away as if your little family has suddenly caught fire. In that moment, you are no longer welcome relatives. You are the embodiment of the horror they thought they had escaped. Congratulations, you've just achieved a new level of social distancing. People don't just stay 6 feet away. They look at you like you've just crawled out of a sewer holding a lit bomb. By the next morning, your sister is burning with fever. Your family is informally quarantined to a small, cold corner of the one-room cottage. Your cousin's family doesn't speak to you. When it is time to eat, your aunt doesn't hand you your bowls. She places them on the floor and pushes them across the dirt with a long stick. It's nothing personal, of course. She's just practicing for a potential future career in zookeeping, and your family is now the main exhibit in the pestilence pavilion. The kindness you were shown just yesterday has evaporated, replaced by a cold, clinical fear. 2 days later, the inevitable happens. Your mother, her hands trembling, confirms the presence of a hard, tender lump under your sister's arm. A bubo. The verdict is in. The sentence has been passed. That evening, your cousin tells you that you have to leave. He is not cruel about it. His voice is strained, his eyes filled with a wretched mixture of pity and self-preservation. He has his own children to think of, he explains. He cannot let his family be destroyed. He points you towards an old, disused shepherd's hut at the edge of his fields, a small, dilapidated structure of stone and rotting wood. You can stay there, he says. He will leave food for you by the big oak tree every morning. Then he turns and walks away, unable to look you in the eye. He is not a monster. He is a terrified man, and the plague has forced him to make a monstrous choice. This breakdown of social bonds is the most terrifying symptom of the plague, a mainstream historical fact lamented by all who wrote about it. The great Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio, describing the plague in Florence, wrote that brother was forsaken by brother, and oftentimes husband by wife. Nay, what is more, and scarcely to be believed, fathers and mothers were found to abandon their own children, untended, unvisited. Basic human decency had officially left the building. It saw the plague coming, packed a small bag, and hopped on the first available horse out of town. Huddled in the darkness of the tiny, windswept hut, you are now faced with this exact horror. Your sister is delirious, her breath coming in shallow rests. And your parents, the two pillars of your world, begin to crumble. Your father, ever the pragmatist, paces the small space. He talks about you and your other sibling. He whispers that perhaps you should leave. Leave your sister there and try to save yourselves. Your mother, hearing this, lets out a sob that is all fury and heartbreak. She cradles your sister's head, refusing to move, accusing your father of being heartless. The family unit, the one thing that has survived the journey, is now fracturing under an impossible strain. In the cities, this was the moment people would frantically summon a notary to make a last will. A quirky tidbit of the plague era being that these notaries became some of the wealthiest and most short-lived professionals around. Out here in the fields, there is no one. There is no priest to give last rites, no notary to witness a will for the few pathetic possessions you own. There is only your family, trapped in a moral nightmare. Historians still argue whether the accounts of mass abandonment, such as those vividly described by Boccaccio, were literary exaggerations intended to emphasize the plague's unique horror, or if they were an accurate reflection of a widespread societal collapse of familial duty. Looking at your father's desperate face and your mother's fierce grief, you realize the truth is somewhere in the terrible middle. People don't want to abandon their loved ones. They are simply driven mad by a fear that is stronger than love, stronger than duty. The night wears on. You sit shivering in the corner, listening to your sister's ragged breathing and your parents' whispered, anguished arguments. The world has shrunk to the four crumbling walls of this hut. The concepts of neighbor, community, and cousin have been burned away. Even the bond of family is being tested to its breaking point. You are no longer refugees seeking shelter. You are an isolated cell of infection, sealed off, waiting to be extinguished. And you realize the greatest victory of the pestilence is not the death of the body, but the death of love, the way it can turn a neighbor, a brother, and even a parent, into a stranger. The new day dawns, but it brings no light into your souls. Your little sister is gone. The fever that burned so brightly in her has been extinguished, leaving behind a small, still form in the corner of the shepherd's hut. The arguments between your parents have ceased, replaced by a thick, suffocating blanket of grief. There are no rituals to perform, no rites to observe. There is only the grim, practical question of what to do with the body, but you don't get the chance to answer it. Through the cracks in the rough wooden door, you see your cousin approaching, carrying the promised parcel of food. He sets it down by the old oak tree as promised, then hesitates. He calls out, his voice trembling. When he receives no answer but your mother's raw, keening sob, he understands. He doesn't come closer. He turns and runs back towards the village, his feet pounding the earth as if the devil himself were at his heels. A few hours later, they return. It's not just your cousin this time, but a small group of village men, their faces hard and set. You hear their muttered voices outside, the sound of fear and grim determination. You shrink back into the darkest corner of the hut as you hear a heavy plank being slammed against the door. Then comes the sound of a hammer, a sharp, rhythmic bang, bang, bang that echoes the blacksmith's hammer from a lifetime ago in the city. With each strike, your heart sinks. You scramble to the door, peering through a crack. They are nailing thick, heavy boards over it, sealing you in. The villagers have decided on a new community building project, building a wall around your hut. It's like a surprise home renovation, except the goal is to make sure you never, ever leave again. This is the brutal reality of medieval quarantine. It is not about care, it is about containment. This practice, a mainstream of horrifying feature of plague responses, was born of the miasma theory. The goal was to trap the bad air, the pestilential vapor, inside with its victims, preventing it from spreading to the rest of the community. In practice, it meant turning a family home into a family tomb. A final board is hammered into place over the single small window, and the last sliver of daylight vanishes. You are plunged into a profound and terrifying darkness, the musty air suddenly thick and close. Then you hear a scraping sound against the outside of the door. This brings us to a quirky and bleak tidbit of plague administration. One of the men is using a piece of charcoal or perhaps reddish ochre from the soil to draw a large, crude cross on your door. It's not there to mark buried treasure. It is the 14th century equivalent of a biohazard sign, a stark warning to all who might pass by. It's a 1-star Yelp review for a public health hazard. Do not recommend. Occupants may be slightly pestilential. Beneath it, they might have scrawled the desperate plea, "Lord, have mercy upon us." The mercy they are praying for is not for you, but for themselves. You are now prisoners, entombed. The world shrinks to the suffocating confines of the hut. The air, already stale, now carries the unmistakable, sweetish scent of death, a smell that will only grow stronger. The food your cousin left sits 100 paces away, by the oak tree, as unreachable as the moon. The slow, gnawing hunger from your journey returns with a vengeance, but this time there is no hope of a meal at the end of it. There is only the certainty of starvation. You are trapped in the world's worst escape room. The only puzzle to solve is how to face your inevitable end with some small shred of dignity. Historians still argue whether these brutal quarantine measures were effective in slowing the plague's spread at a macro level, or if their main function was psychological, giving the healthiest sense of proactive control while ultimately ensuring a near 100% mortality rate for those locked inside. For you, the debate is moot. The policy is 100% effective in one regard, ensuring you and your remaining family will die here. The sounds of the men's footsteps fade, leaving an unnerving silence. There is no more shouting, no more weeping. There is only the sound of your own ragged breathing in the dark. You are sealed in with your grief, your fear, and the body of your sister. You fled the chaos of the city only to find a quieter, more absolute doom in the peaceful countryside. You have found your final resting place, not in a consecrated churchyard, but in a forgotten stone hut, buried alive long before your heart has actually stopped beating. A day inside your tomb is an eternity. Time ceases to be measured by the sun, which you cannot see, but by the growing torment of your body. Thirst is the first and most immediate torturer, a dry, rasping fire in your throat. Hunger is a dull, constant ache beneath it. And the air is a thick, foul soup, heavy with the smell of fear and the cloying sweetness of your sister's still body. The initial shock of being imprisoned has worn off, replaced by a delirious, creeping despair. And then, the despair finds a new focus. Your other sibling begins to shiver. It's a faint, uncontrollable tremor at first, but you know exactly what it is. It's the prologue. The plague has decided it is not yet finished with your family. This new horror shatters your parents' grief-stricken paralysis and jolts them into frantic, desperate action. With no doctor, no herbs, no escape, they are forced to turn inward, to unleash the full arsenal of cures and comforts that exist only in their heads. Your mother, her faith now burned down to its most raw and potent form, begins to chant. Her voice is a low, monotonous hum in the darkness, reciting every prayer and litany she has ever known, the words blurring into a single, continuous plea for mercy. When prayer alone feels insufficient, she turns to something else, something that lives in the blurry space between faith and magic. She finds a sharp stone on the floor and begins scratching into one of the wooden boards of the wall. You watch as she painstakingly carves a triangle of letters, a quirky but common folk charm against fever. At the top, she writes the word abracadabra. On the line below, she writes it again, but without the final letter. And so on, shrinking the word with each line until only the letter remains at the bottom. The belief was that as the magical word diminished, so too would the illness. It is the 14th century equivalent of frantically deleting system files, hoping one of them is the virus. Historians still argue whether the use of folk magic and charms during the plague represented a true crisis of faith and a reversion to paganism, or if these practices were fully integrated into popular Christianity, seen not as a contradiction, but as just another tool in God's provided arsenal against evil. While your mother fights the pestilence with words, your father needs to fight it with his hands. The pragmatist, driven mad by helplessness, decides to become an apothecary. His pharmacy is the dirt floor of the hut. He is trying to replicate a legendary cure-all, a mainstream medical marvel of the age known as theriac. True theriac was a complex, honey-based concoction of more than 60 ingredients, including exotic spices, herbs, and, famously, the flesh of vipers, all aged for years. Your father has none of that. Your father is now a desperate bartender, and his signature cocktail is grief and floor dirt. He scrapes together cobwebs, crushes dried beetles he finds in a corner, pulls up a few pathetic weeds growing through the floor, and mashes it all together with spit and dust into a vile-looking paste. This is the pinnacle of your available medical science. a magic word scratched on a wall, and a mud pie made of filth and despair. Your family is trying to fight a virulent bacterial infection with a placebo and a poison. It's a bold strategy. Let's see if it pays off. Narrator, it will not pay off. They try to force the gritty paste into your sibling's mouth, who is now too weak and feverish to resist. They smear the rest on their forehead as a poultice. Your mother places the board with the abracadabra charm on their chest. They have deployed all their weapons. You watch this pathetic, heartbreaking theater from your corner, your own thirst a roaring distraction. You are a spectator at the end of the world. And the cures, of course, do nothing. The fever does not shrink with the magic word. It intensifies. The potion does not draw out the poison. It probably just adds new, more mundane ones. By what you guess is evening, your sibling is delirious. The buboes are rising in their neck, tender and unmistakable. The frantic energy drains out of your parents, replaced by a hollow-eyed acceptance. The magical charm is just a scratching on a board. The potion is just dirt. The prayers have gone unanswered. The last, desperate remedies have failed. There is nothing left to try. All that is left to do is sit in the suffocating darkness, listening to the ragged, familiar sound of labored breathing, and wait for the second death. The second death is quieter than the first. There are no more arguments, no more frantic attempts at folk magic. There is only a deep, profound silence in the hut, broken by your mother's soft, exhausted weeping. The world has now shrunk to just 3 people, you, your mother, and your father, all sitting in the dark, waiting. But the plague is not a patient hunter. It doesn't need to be. After what feels like an eternity, you feel it. A tremor that begins deep in your bones. A sudden, violent chill that has nothing to do with the damp air of the hut. Then comes the heat, a fire that starts behind your eyes and spreads through your entire body. Your turn has come. As you slide into the fever, the oppressive reality of the hut begins to dissolve. The darkness behind your eyelids is not empty. It begins to flicker with images. Your mind, desperate to escape its prison, travels back. You remember a story you heard, or perhaps a sight you glimpsed in the chaotic last days before you fled the city. It's a vision of the other great response to the plague, the final, most extreme expression of the God's wrath theory. You see a procession. In your mind's eye, a crowd is flooding the city's main square. But this is no market day. These people move with a strange, rhythmic purpose. They're the flagellants. Hundreds of them, men and women, marching in formation, barefoot, their heads bowed and covered by hoods. They wear simple white robes marked with a stark red cross, the symbol of their pilgrimage of pain. They carry heavy crucifixes and banners depicting the Virgin Mary and saints. And they are singing. It's a strange, hypnotic, and deeply unnerving hymn, a Geistlied, a song unique to their movement. This quirky, mournful music is the soundtrack to their penance, and it's a sound that, once heard, is never forgotten. Their plan to fight the plague is coordinated, large-scale self-harm. It's a public health initiative that somehow manages to be less effective and more painful than the plague doctor's methods. At least he only tortured one person at a time. The procession snakes its way to the churchyard and forms a large, ominous circle. On a signal from their master, they all drop to the ground, arranging their bodies in the shape of a cross to symbolize their own sinfulness. They lie there, weeping and praying, and then they rise. Each of them produces a terrible instrument, a scourge, a whip with multiple leather tails, And this is the mainstream, horrifying fact of their existence. These wigs are tipped with sharp pieces of metal. Then, the ritual begins. To the rhythm of their own chanting, they begin to whip themselves over their backs and shoulders. The sound is sickening, a percussive, wet thud mixed with the jangle of the metal studs. They do this twice a day, every day, for 33.5 days, 1 day for each year of Christ's life on earth. They believe their suffering, their blood, is a sacrifice that can appease an angry God and cleanse the world of the sin that brought the pestilence. It was the hottest ticket in town, because what else is there to do? It's dinner and a show, where dinner is non-existent, and the show is a gruesome display of mass religious hysteria. This movement created a huge headache for the church. Historians still argue whether the flagellant movement was a genuine grassroots lay piety movement that was later condemned by the church for its excesses, or if it was an inherently heretical and anti-clerical movement from its inception, seeking to bypass the authority of priests and bishops entirely. You, in your fever dream, can see why. The flagellant master hears confessions and grants absolution, a role reserved only for the clergy. They are a church unto themselves. Eventually, even the Pope, Clement VI, had to step in and condemn them, officially shutting the movement down. Getting a cease and desist letter from the Pope is how you know your religious movement has truly gone off the rails. The vision in your head intensifies. The rhythmic flailing of the whips matches the frantic, hammering pulse in your own neck. The smell of blood and sweat seems to fill the hut. The faces of the watching crowd morph into leering, skeletal masks. This, you think, is the world you left behind. A world that has gone mad, trying to cure a disease of the body by mortifying the flesh. The most extreme act of faith imaginable, and it was just another useless, desperate cure. The vision shatters, and you are back in your body, back in the suffocating darkness of your tomb. The chanting fades, replaced by the sound of your own shallow, ragged breathing. The fever is rising, and you know with a chilling certainty that there are no more spectacles to witness, no more cures to try. There is only the end. The fever has taken you. The frantic visions of marching flagellants have dissolved, and in their place, a strange and profound calm settles over you. The fire in your body has burned itself out, leaving only a cold, floating detachment. You are no longer an active participant in your own suffering. You are now a spectator, watching the last act of a play from a great distance. Your gaze, real or imagined, drifts across the small, dark space of the hut. You see the still forms of your two siblings. You see your parents, huddled together, two silent statues of grief who will soon become still themselves. And you are aware of your own body, a useless, failing machine. 5 bodies, sealed in a stone box, waiting to return to the earth. And your final, lucid thought is not one of fear, but of logistics. What happens to all the bodies? Your mind floats away from the hut, away from the quiet countryside, and back to the roaring, dying city you fled. You wonder how they are managing. In normal times, a death was a solemn, structured affair. The church bell would toll, marking the passing of a soul. The body would be washed, wrapped in a clean linen shroud, and watched over by family during a wake. A priest would lead a procession to the churchyard, where a proper grave and consecrated ground awaited. But in a city where hundreds, perhaps thousands, are dying every week, that delicate system shatters completely. The job of gravedigger suddenly has a lot of openings, and a very, very high turnover rate. The benefits package is terrible, but the job security is, for a brief and horrifying time, Excellent. The priests, who are meant to give last rites and preside over burials, are dying as fast as their parishioners. The sacred ground of the churchyards fills up in a matter of weeks, packed so tight there is no room for another soul. So, you imagine the new system, the one born of pure, overwhelming necessity. You see the corpse cart, a simple wooden wagon rumbling down the deserted, filthy lanes. It's not driven by a solemn church official, but by a man hired for the job, a becchino, his face wrapped in a cloth, his pockets filled with coins that carry the stench of death. He rings a small, jarring bell, and his cry echoes off the jettied houses, "Bring out your dead." It's the world's most depressing ice cream truck jingle. Instead of treats, the cart is full of your neighbors, and the only thing the driver is giving out is a profound sense of existential dread. From doorways, people bring their shrouded loved ones, or, if they are too sick or too afraid, the beccini themselves, along with official women known as searchers of the dead, would enter the homes to verify the death and drag the body out. And where does the cart go? In your mind's eye, you see its destination. Outside the city walls, in a fallow field, a great wound has been opened in the earth. This is the plague pit. It is not a grave. It is a trench, monstrously deep and wide. This is the mainstream, ghastly solution to an unsolvable problem. The cart backs up to the edge and tilts, spilling its contents with a dreadful, soft thud. There is no ceremony, no prayer. Just the bodies, piled one on top of the other. The great chronicler Agnolo di Tura, writing of the plague in Siena, described it best. They were layered, as one layers lasagna with cheese. So your final resting place isn't a peaceful plot, but a giant human casserole. It's a culinary metaphor that really makes you lose your appetite, which, given that you're already dying of plague, is a pretty moot point. This abandonment of sacred ritual was a horror unto itself. Historians still argue whether the abandonment of traditional Christian burial rites caused a more profound psychological trauma than the deaths themselves, as the survivors were denied the closure and spiritual comfort essential to their worldview. To die without confession, to be buried without prayer in unconsecrated ground, for your parents, this would have been a fear equal to the pestilence itself. Your vision of the teeming, layered pit fades, and your awareness returns to the silent, dark hut. No cart will come for you. No one will cry for you to be brought out. You and your family will lie here together, untouched, uncounted. And as the last of your strength ebbs away, you feel a final, strange flicker of peace. Maybe this is better. To be left here, in the quiet, away from the groaning carts and the industrial horror of the pits. To decay in the darkness, together. It is a tiny, bleak comfort you cling to as your own breath grows shallow, and the floating detachment gives way to a final, welcoming darkness. And so, in the cold, dark silence of a forgotten shepherd's hut, your story ends. Your fever breaks, your heart stills, and the small, personal apocalypse of your family is complete. You have become a statistic, one of millions whose names are lost to history, whose final moments were unrecorded and unobserved. But outside your little stone tomb, the world did not end. It kept turning, and in its unending grief and terror, it began to do what terrified people always do when faced with a disaster they cannot comprehend. It began to look for someone to blame. God's wrath was too vast. Miasma was too impersonal. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the death demanded a more tangible villain, a human face to pin the horror on. It demanded a scapegoat. With all the official and unofficial cures having failed, a new, terrible theory began to spread, a whisper that traveled faster and more virulently than the plague itself. The theory was that the pestilence was not a natural occurrence at all, but a deliberate act of malice. It was a poison manufactured by enemies and secretly poured into the town wells and rivers. Their theory was that a secret international conspiracy was putting this poison in the water supply. A plot so vast and sinister that it somehow caused a disease that also killed the supposed plotters themselves in huge numbers. The logic here is, well, it's not really there, is it? But in a world gripped by fear, logic is the first casualty. And the target of this conspiracy theory was a group that had been persecuted in Europe for centuries, the Jewish people. This accusation is the mainstream, tragic fact of the plague's social fallout. Across Europe, but especially in the towns along the Rhine River in Germany and France, a wave of horrific violence was unleashed. Confessions were obtained through brutal torture, where innocent people would admit to anything to make the pain stop. These forced confessions were then read aloud to whip the public into a frenzy. And here we find a quirky, dark tidbit that connects back to the visions you had in your fever dream. The flagellant processions, those parades of pious self-harm, were often the spark that lit the flame. As they marched from town to town, their extreme, hysterical piety often curdled into violence against anyone they deemed an enemy of Christ. They would arrive in a town, perform their bloody ritual, and then lead the enraged local populace in an attack on the Jewish quarter. In cities like Strasbourg, Mainz, and Cologne, the results were devastating. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of people were massacred. We don't need to dwell on the specifics, only to understand the sheer madness of it. Imagine the terror of being locked in your home, not by a disease, but by your own neighbors, an angry mob whose reason has been completely consumed by fear. Once an angry mob gets an idea in its head, no matter how ridiculous, trying to stop it with logic is like trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. You're just going to get wet and look very, very foolish. The motivations behind this violence were complex. Historians still argue whether this persecution was a spontaneous eruption of popular hysteria born of pure fear, or if it was cynically encouraged by local nobles and merchants who stood to gain financially by canceling the enormous debts they owed to Jewish moneylenders and seizing their property. In all likelihood, it was a toxic mixture of both, genuine, terrified hysteria, expertly manipulated by those who saw a profitable opportunity in the chaos. Some figures of authority did try to stop the madness. Pope Clement VI, the same man who condemned the flagellants, issued 2 official papal bulls, or declarations, stating that the Jews were not to blame. He pointed out the obvious, that Jewish communities were dying from the exact same plague in the exact same numbers. But this was the 14th century equivalent of a fact check on a viral conspiracy theory. No one listened. The story of a secret, evil plot was far more compelling than the mundane, terrifying truth that the world was simply suffering from a random, uncontrollable natural disaster. This search for scapegoats was the ultimate moral failure of the medieval world when confronted by the Black Death. It was a testament to the fact that when societies are pushed to their absolute limit, their deepest prejudices and hatreds can boil to the surface. In the face of a faceless, microbial enemy they could not see or fight, many people chose to invent a human one they could punish. It was easier to burn down a neighbor's house than to confront the terrifying emptiness of a world where suffering could be random, meaningless, and absolute. The silence is the first thing you notice. For the first time in what feels like a lifetime, the ever-present chorus of the dying has ceased. The desperate prayers, the endless tolling of church bells, the cries of the sick, they have all faded away. The great fire of the pestilence, having consumed everything it could, has finally begun to burn itself out. The fever has broken, not just in a single body, but in the body of the world itself. Imagine, now, that you are one of the ones left behind. You survived. Through some combination of luck, a robust constitution, or the simple divine mystery of fate, you are still breathing. After weeks, maybe months of hiding, of listening to the world die outside your door, you finally step outside. The air is still and cool. It no longer feels thick with the miasma of fear. But the world you step into is a ghost of the one you remember. The city is finally quiet. You can actually hear yourself think. Unfortunately, your main thoughts are, why am I alive? And, is that a rat? Oh God, please be a healthy rat. So maybe the old noise was better. You walk down the middle of the lane, a path that was once a teeming, muddy river of humanity. Now, it's empty. More than half the doors you pass are marked with the faded, ominous red cross of the plague, a silent testament to the families that were erased. Weeds are already beginning to push their way through the cobblestones. In eerie, unnatural green is creeping back into a world of brown and gray. This is the great, mainstream fact that defines the new world, the staggering loss of life. Modern demographers estimate that the Black Death wiped out between 30% and 60% of Europe's entire population. It was a demographic collapse so complete that the continent would not return to its pre-plague population levels for over 200 years. You don't know the numbers, of course. All you know is that the world feels hollowed out. You walk past a blacksmith's forge, the one that used to wake you every morning with the clang of hammer on anvil. It is silent, the doors slightly ajar, a fine layer of rust already settling on the tools inside. The baker's shop is empty, a ghostly dusting of flour still on the floor. Technically, it would be looting to walk in and take a bread pan. But at this point, it's less looting and more the world's saddest, most morbid shopping spree. There are so many things, but no people. The world is a vast inheritance with too few heirs. And this leads to a quirky, unexpected consequence of the plague, the inheritance boom. With so many people dying so quickly, property changed hands at a dizzying rate. A man who went into the plague as a landless laborer might emerge as the owner of his cousin's farm, his uncle's workshop, and his neighbor's house, simply by being the last one standing. You, yourself, might be the sole inheritor of everything your family ever owned. It is not a victory. It is a profound burden, a collection of ghosts and memories that now belong only to you. You see the other survivors shuffling through the streets like you are. You look into their eyes, and they look into yours, and you see the same haunted, hollowed-out expression. There is no joy in this survival, no celebration. There is only a shared, unspoken trauma. What do you do with the simple, impossible fact of being alive? Chroniclers of the time reported two extreme reactions, and it's a subject historians still argue about, whether the predominant psychological response among survivors was one of reckless, carpe diem hedonism, eating, drinking, and being merry. For tomorrow we may die again, or a deep, pervasive piety and obsession with death. You see both. In a tavern, a small group is drinking heavily, gambling with the inherited coins of their dead relatives, their laughter loud and brittle. In the church, another group is on their knees, praying with a new, somber intensity, endowing chapels and paying for endless masses for the souls of the departed. And you? You find yourself caught somewhere in the middle, in a state of profound numbness. Your new life philosophy is a weird mix of crippling depression and a vague desire to see what happens next. You've seen the absolute worst the world has to offer. Now, you're just sort of sticking around to see if it comes up with any interesting sequels. You stand alone in the middle of the empty street as dusk begins to fall. The old world is gone, utterly and completely. The new one has not yet been built. You are standing on the ashes, surrounded by the ghosts of what was. The physical disease might be gone, for now, but the psychological wounds, the deep, scarring trauma of outliving your world, are just beginning to fester. You survived the plague, yes. But now you have to figure out how to survive the survival. The ghosts don't leave, not really. They are your constant companions in the quiet, hollowed-out world. But even ghosts cannot feed you. The numbness that shielded you in the immediate aftermath of the pestilence begins to recede, forced out by the simple, undeniable demands of your own body. You need to eat. You need to work. And so, you venture back into the world of the living, or what's left of it, expecting the same life of toil and subsistence you knew before. You are about to discover that while the plague took almost everything, it also gave the survivors something completely unexpected: power. You go to the estate of the local lord, a man whose father would have considered you little more than property, bound to the land. You expect to beg for a scrap of work, to plow his fields for the same meager share of the crop your own father received. But the Lord's fields are fallow. His workforce is dead. He doesn't look at you with disdain. He looks at you with desperation. He needs you far more than you need him. For your entire life, your labor was worth less than a bag of turnips. Now, suddenly, you're a hot commodity. You go from, "Please, sir, may I have another crumb?" to, "Actually, I'm holding out for a better offer, and maybe a dental plan." The lords of the realm are not amused. This is the great, unintended economic revolution of the Black Death, a mainstream historical fact that reshaped society from the ground up. With the labor pool cut in half, the value of that labor skyrocketed. For the first time in centuries, the working person had bargaining power. Landlords who refused to pay higher wages found their peasants simply packed up and left for the next manor, whose lord was willing to pay. The old feudal bonds, the obligations that tied a family to a piece of land for generations, were dissolving. They were being replaced by something new and radical: a cash wage. This was a profound and complex shift. Historians still argue whether the Black Death was the primary catalyst that single-handedly destroyed feudalism, or if it merely accelerated a process of change that was already underway due to factors like urbanization and the growth of a market economy. But for you, living through it, it feels like the world has been turned upside down. You are no longer bound to a lord or a piece of land. You are, for the first time, a free agent in a shattered world. And with better wages comes a better life. You can afford things that were once the exclusive domain of the wealthy. You're eating better than you ever have. You're having meat, actual meat, like beef and mutton, more than once a week. You drink strong ale instead of the weak swill of your past. You eat bread made from wheat, not the coarse, gritty maslin of your childhood. Your ancestors, who lived their entire lives on watery pottage, would be looking down from heaven thinking you'd somehow won the lottery. You can also afford better clothes. You discard your rough, scratchy tunic for one made of finer wool, perhaps even dyed a vibrant color. You buy a pair of sturdy leather boots. And this is where you run into a quirky, reactionary pushback from the old guard: sumptuary loss. The nobility, seeing peasants and artisans dressing above their station, were horrified. They saw it as a breakdown of the God-given social order. So they passed laws specifying exactly who could wear what. That shade of scarlet? Reserved for high nobility. For trim on your cloak? Absolutely forbidden for someone of your class. The nobility basically tried to outlaw being new money. Sorry, you can't wear that fancy hat. It's for established, old-school rich people only. You'll have to stick to beige, the official color of the working class. It's the medieval equivalent of a bouncer at a velvet rope nightclub, checking your pedigree instead of your ID. But these laws were almost impossible to enforce. The dam had broken. You survived, and your survival has afforded you a life your parents could never have imagined. You might even have enough to buy a small plot of land for yourself, to build your own cottage on it, to be your own master. It is a strange, disorienting prosperity, a ladder of opportunity built from the bones of the dead. Every extra coin in your pocket, every fine meal you eat, is a direct result of the unimaginable loss you endured. The trauma of the silence is still there, but it's now mixed with the hum of reconstruction, the sounds of a new world being built, whether the old lords like it or not. You are no longer just a survivor. You are a pioneer in a radically new economic landscape, your fortune and your grief forever intertwined. Life is settled into a new, strange rhythm. The frantic scramble for survival has been replaced by the steady work of rebuilding. You have coins in your purse, meat on your table, and a roof over your head that doesn't belong to a landlord. And yet, the silence of the world remains, a constant, low hum beneath the surface of your new prosperity. You find yourself with something your parents never had: leisure time. And with this time, you begin to notice how the collective trauma, the shared nightmare you all endured, is beginning to curdle and express itself in the world around you. The plague may have left the streets, but it has taken up permanent residence in the imagination. You wander into the parish church, perhaps to offer a prayer for the family you lost, or perhaps just to sit in a place that still feels connected to the old world. You notice a new, vast mural being painted on the north wall, the space traditionally reserved for darker, more cautionary themes. So you go to church for a bit of comfort, and the hot new mural on the wall is a conga line of skeletons dancing with everyone you know. It's not exactly uplifting. It's like a public health warning designed by a particularly morbid teenager. This is the danse macabre, the dance of death, and it is the defining artistic obsession of the post-plague world. This is a mainstream historical fact, a motif that spread across Europe in paintings, woodcuts, and morality plays. You stare at the freshly painted wall, mesmerized. A series of grinning skeletons, their bones jaunty and animated, are linked arm in arm with a procession of the living. And the living are from every walk of life. A skeleton gleefully leads the Pope, whose triple tiara is askew. Another twirls the Emperor, his crown no defense. There's the knight, the merchant, the monk, the beautiful maiden, and the poor farmer, just like you used to be. Each is being pulled inexorably into a dance they cannot escape. The message is brutally, shockingly clear. Death comes for everyone. Your wealth, your piety, your power, none of it matters. The grave is the great equalizer. The dance of death was the original "we're all in this together" message. Except this was the horrifying, inevitable march to the tomb. It's strangely comforting, in a bleak sort of way, to know that even the king, with his fancy fur-trimmed robes that the sumptuary laws forbid you from wearing, also had a non-negotiable date with a skeleton. On another, older wall of the church, you see a faded painting depicting a related, quirky legend that has become hugely popular, the tale of the 3 living and the 3 dead. In the mural, 3 young, arrogant noblemen are out hunting, their fine clothes and proud horses on full display. They are suddenly confronted by 3 horrifying figures, their own future selves, depicted as decaying corpses, crawling with worms. One of the corpses raises a bony finger and delivers a chilling warning, a phrase you might see written in Latin underneath. What we were, you are. What we are, you will be. It's the ultimate memento mori, a reminder to remember death, and it hits you with the force of a physical blow. Art before the plague was full of serene saints and golden-winged angels, stories of heaven and glory. Art after the plague is skeletons, decay, and the ever-present, grinning face of death. Future art historians will look back on this period and assume everyone was really into Halloween. But for you, it doesn't feel morbid for the sake of it. It feels honest. It feels true. This is the world as you now know it to be. Historians still argue whether the macabre art of the post-plague era was a sign of a depressed, pessimistic society obsessed with decay, or if it was a vital, almost therapeutic, form of artistic expression that helped people process their collective trauma and reevaluate their spiritual priorities. Standing here, in the quiet of the church, you feel it's both. It's a reflection of the world's bottomless grief, but it is also a tool to make sense of it, a way to stare the horror directly in the face and acknowledge its power. You leave the church, the images of the dancing skeletons burned into your mind. You now see that the plague hasn't just changed the economy or emptied the houses. It has fundamentally rewired the soul of your society. The shared experience of the pestilence has become the one great story that everyone has to tell, and they are telling it on their walls, in their books, and on their stages. The skeletons are dancing in everyone's imagination now, a constant reminder that life is a fragile, fleeting thing, lived in the long, cold shadow of the grave. Years pass. The raw, open wound of the plague years has begun to scar over. You've become accustomed to the empty spaces, the quiet streets, the ghosts of the past. Your life, once a desperate scramble, now has a measure of stability and comfort you could never have previously imagined. But the fear never truly goes away. It lies dormant, a sleeping dragon in the back of everyone's mind. Every time a neighbor gets a fever, every time a strange ship appears in the harbor, the city holds its collective breath. And you begin to see a slow, grudging change in the way the world works. People are asking the great question, what do we do when it comes back? Did we learn anything? The city council, after seeing their previous strategies of pray harder and blame innocent people fail in the most spectacular fashion possible, finally stumbled upon a revolutionary new concept in medieval governance. What if we actually did something organized? The first changes are small. You see new ordinances, read aloud by the town crier, about public cleanliness. There are stricter rules about dumping waste in the streets, and smelly trades like butchering and tanning are slowly pushed outside the city walls. The authorities are, in their own way, fighting a war against the miasma they still believe caused the sickness. It's the right action for the wrong reason, but it's a start. Then, you begin to hear travelers' tales, not of plague, but of prevention. The news comes from the great, wealthy trading cities of Italy, Venice, Florence, Ragusa, places that live and die by the sea, the very highway the plague traveled. They have created something new, permanent boards of health. These are not the ad hoc, panicking councils of the plague years, but standing committees of magistrates given extraordinary powers to act the moment pestilence is suspected. It is the birth of public health as an arm of the state. And these boards have invented a powerful, new tool. You hear of the lazaretto, the quarantine station. In Venice, they have designated an entire island for this purpose. Now, when a ship arrives from a place where plague is rumored, it is not allowed to dock. It is forced to anchor at this island for 40 days. A quarantino, the origin of our word. Sailors, passengers, and cargo are held in isolation to see if the disease manifests. Venice's solution was to make all visiting sailors hang out on a remote island for 40 days before entering the city. It's the ultimate go to your room and think about what you've done, but for grown men on a boat. And your room is a windswept island. You can't help but contrast this organized, if harsh, isolation with the memory of families like your first one, sealed up in their own homes, a private horror born of public panic. The lazaretto is impersonal, bureaucratic, and probably terrifying for those held there. But it is not a death sentence. It is an attempt to separate the sick from the healthy on a civic scale, not just one house at a time. This is a profound leap forward. Along with this comes another quirky innovation you start to see at your own city gates: the health pass. This was a document, a bill of health, issued by a city's magistrates, certifying that the bearer and their goods came from a place currently free of plague. To travel or trade, you now needed this special paper saying you weren't pestilential. Of course, a whole industry of forgeries popped up almost immediately. It turns out, faking official documents to get into places you're not supposed to be is not a new human invention. So, did humanity truly learn what caused the plague? Not at all. That's centuries away. Historians still argue whether these early public health measures were a direct result of new, rational thinking about disease contagion, the idea that it spreads from person to person, or if they were simply a more organized and bureaucratic application of the old miasma theory. The health boards were still trying to contain bad air. They just realized that bad air seemed to travel with people, ships, and bales of cloth. But in a way, the theory didn't matter as much as the result. The great lesson of the Black Death was not a medical one, but a civic one. It taught the burgeoning states of Europe that pestilence was a public enemy, a threat to the state itself, and it could not be fought by individuals alone. Prayer, amulets, flight, and scapegoating had all failed. The only effective response was organized, state-sponsored, and unfortunately, coercive. They learned that the only way to protect the whole community was to curtail the freedom of the individual. It's a grim lesson, and a familiar one. It's a lesson paid for by the lives of millions, including the family you once had, and a cold shepherd's hut, long ago. Decades have passed. You are old now, your body stooped and lined with the years, but your mind is a library of a time the young can barely comprehend. The world is loud again. A new generation, born in the long, prosperous peace after the great pestilence, fills the streets with their noise and their energy. They live in a world of higher wages, greater freedom, and opportunity. To them, the plague is a horror story, a dark fairy tale you tell about a world that no longer exists. You try to explain the silence, the fear, the way the world held its breath, and they listen with a polite but distant curiosity. Okay, boomer, their eyes seem to say, we get it, you walked uphill both ways in a miasma. And then, the dragon stirs. Because the single most important lesson, the one that truly defined the next 300 years of European history, was this: the Black Death was not a one-time event. It was just the devastating opening chapter. The plague had found a new home in the ecosystem, and just when everyone got comfortable and took down the end is nigh decorations, it would come back for a reunion tour. Every 10 or 20 years, another wave would break upon the shore. These later plagues were often not as universally catastrophic, but they were terrifying nonetheless, frequently targeting the young who had no exposure or immunity from previous waves. You watch it happen all over again, but this time, you see the lessons of your generation being put into practice. When the rumors of pestilence start, the city's new Board of Health immediately swings into action. The gates are monitored. Health passes are demanded. Sheikhs are forced into quarantine. The response is no longer pure panic. It is a grim, practice drill. The fear is still there, a cold spike in the heart of every citizen, but it is now managed, bureaucratic. It is a testament to the fact that something, at least, was learned. The spiritual world has adapted, too. You walk into the church, and you see a new addition to the pantheon of saints in the corner. It's a statue of Saint Roch, a pilgrim saint. This is a quirky, telling tidbit of the age. The statue shows him pointing to a single, angry bubo on his inner thigh, the token of the plague that he famously survived. Before the plague, you prayed to general saints for general problems. Now, the spiritual world has specialists. Worried about a sore throat? Pray to Saint Blaise. Terrified of the recurring pestilence? You need Saint Roch, the patron saint of terrifying leg lumps. It's like the divine world finally got a proper filing system. But even with these new systems and new saints, the fear remains. The long-term effects of this recurring scythe were profound. Historians still argue whether the recurring waves of plague were the primary factor that suppressed Europe's population growth for centuries, or if other factors like the endless warfare, famines, and changing marriage patterns played an equally significant role. What is certain is that for generations, society lived with a demographic handbrake pulled on, a constant threat of being cold that shaped every aspect of life. You, in your old age, are a bridge between two worlds. You are a living relic of the Great Death, the one that changed everything. You see your grandchildren living in a world that is, in many ways, stronger and more resilient than the one you were born into. They have civic authorities who, however imperfectly, try to protect them. They have a culture that has stared into the abyss and processed its trauma through art. They have an economy that offers them a freedom your own parents could never have conceived of. But you also know the price that was paid for this new world. You know the stories behind the faded red crosses on old doorways. You know why the skeletons dance on the church wall. The greatest legacy of the plague was its long, lingering shadow, the knowledge that the world could be upended in a moment, and that survival was a fragile, precious, and often random gift. The terror became a part of life itself, a seasonal fear like the winter cold, a threat that would haunt the dreams of Europeans for centuries to come. And so, our long journey through this bleak and distant time comes to a close. The echoes of the chanting flagellants and the cries of the dying can finally fade away, leaving only the soft, gentle sounds of your own room. The world you have been wandering through, full of mud and fear and uncertainty, was a real place, but it is not your place. Your world, right here and now, is one of safety and comfort. Feel the softness of the pillow beneath your head, the steady weight of the blanket over you. Listen to the quiet hum of the fan, a sound as far removed from the clang of a plague bell as a star is from the earth. The grim figures of the past can now recede. Let the hollowed-out cities become whole again in your mind. Let the dancing skeletons still their feet, and let the profound silence of that lost world be replaced by the quiet peace of your own breath, rising and falling in a slow, easy rhythm. There is no more fear here, no more struggle. There is only rest. The night is deep and calm, and you are safe within it. Allow your mind to drift away from history, away from stories, and into the simple, quiet, and welcoming space of sleep. Let the last vestiges of thought dissolve into a comfortable, peaceful darkness.